Hi, this is the second episode in my project of making a surfboard. In this episode, we're going to be focusing on shaping the rails and chamfering all the corners on the board to get it ready for fiberglassing. I was going to include fiberglassing in this video, but it's run a little bit long, so I'm going to split it up. So I hope you enjoy. Let's talk a little bit about rail bands. So what I've done is I've used a T-square, a framing square, like this, and at 1 foot from the tail, and then 3 feet, and then 5 feet, I've gone along and marked at one depth, and then a second depth, and the same on either side. And I've changed it a little bit as you go down the board. The center is a little bit wider, and the tail is a little bit narrower. And then so what I've done is each of those dots here, I've made a fair curve that runs along the board and connects each of those dots at the 1, 3, and the 5. And then I've done the same thing on the side of the board. And so what you do is what I started to do here is bring the profile of the board down to the lower edge, down to the line I made on the side of the board, and the upper edge to the line I made it on top of the board. So you can see that there, how I'm starting to chamfer that edge over and round the rail. And I'm using this Surfboard rasp to kind of rough it in, and then I'll switch over to sandpaper soon. So then I just have to do that down the whole board, and be sure to keep it symmetrical. So it's a little bit hard to pick it up on camera, but the first, I guess, chamfer is cut on both sides. So I'm down to the line on this side, and then I've cut the line on this side. And so now what I've done at each of my 1, 3, and 5, I have marked a line halfway down, from halfway in between this chamfer I've cut. And so now I'm going to connect those lines, those dots, I guess, from each of the points. And then I will bring that on a secondary bevel from this line I drew down to halfway between there. And that way that curve is going to get steeper and steeper as you go down, and it'll be a compound curve. This is the bevel that we're keeping, and then we're removing this to have it slope down. So the board is getting close. The deck is looking nice and rounded. So now, one other thing to note is
One other thing to note is that I started my chamfer 18 inches from the tail. I brought it back a little bit just to kind of feather it in. And I made this chamfer basically square. I measured up roughly the same distance up from the bottom this way onto the side and then in. And then I just connected those lines and then rounded them over. Pretty straightforward.
But I left the tail basically at a 90 degrees. And this has to do with the hydrodynamics, and it actually helps the water shed off the board rather than kind of pulling it along with it. And so it helps the board turn easier. So you want to keep the back end of your board closer to 90 degrees. This was not really a tutorial on how to shape the rails. This is the first board I've done, and I just kind of took some information from different things I found online and kind of combined those. A big thing that I've seen is that you just kind of have to go by eye, and what looks good to the eye is normally what's correct. Some shapers who are really good and have shaped tons of boards can just count the number of strokes and then just mimic that on either side, and that's how they can do it. And then some people like to be really precise on their rails measurements. But I think there's only so far that can go, and that it's really nice to have those measurements and you need to follow those. But at a certain point, you know, just kind of counting your strokes, make sure you're making nice, long, even passes, not taking too much in one area, and then also making sure that you're not taking too much from one side, and mimic that on the other side. And then just look down the board this way, look down the rail, and just keep it nice and smooth. To shape all those chamfers and all the rails, what I used a lot was a piece of 80 grit sandpaper, and then I have this hunk of steel, of mild steel, that I just had, which is a little bit weird. It's a little bit heavy. Normally you can just use a piece of wood and that works fine, but I had this out here, and I kind of like it because you know it's definitely not going to bend or anything, and it kind of gives you a weight to kind of just bring it along, and I thought it made a nice and crisp line, so I liked using that. And then once I had all of my edges taken to the measurements I had made and all of my rail lines, I switched over to this sanding block, which has 80 grit sandpaper, or no, it has 100 grit sandpaper, and then behind it, it's actually backed by a piece of Scotch-Brite, so it has a little bit of give. It's a little bit, it can kind of deflect in a little bit. That helps it smooth out all the corners and gives a nice natural flow. So I really like using this. And so now what I'm going to do is take this piece of sandpaper and turn the board up on its rail. And this will be the final piece where I'm bringing it along and really honing in that edge. There we are, we're all set and ready for fiberglassing. Stay tuned for that video. It should be up pretty quickly. Thank you.